Happy Sunday. Welcome back to the Upset Podcast. Tonight we're talking about to be a mother, fertility, faith, and forward steps. Coming up next. All right. Once again, welcome back to the Upset Podcast and happy Mother's Day. We'll get into that a little later. We are excited because this is a special episode of the Upset. I mean, all of our episodes are special, but this one is unique because about this time I would be like, and I'm so happy to be with these people. But that's not the case today. Actually, today I'm happy to be with this person. Hi, our special guest. Hi, Armina.
Hi. Hey, Tasha. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Welcome to the Upset.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here today.
Oh, great. Great. We're honored to have you. Before we get into our little dialogue here, tell the people a little bit about yourself. We see LMSW after your name there, but tell the people about you, those who don't know.
So I am a licensed social worker. I practice out of Delaware, and my thing is trauma, depression, and anxiety, because I think depression and anxiety are twins. You don't see one without the other. And so that's typically the population I treat. Okay. And I am a professor at Del State University in the social work department. Woo woo, and it's Teacher Appreciation Month.
That's right.
I'll take all month, but it's the week. And so yeah, I'm doing great. I love where God has me right now. And so that's it.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the podcast. And we're so happy to have you because the topic we're talking about this evening is so important. And you know, the people, our people, you're like, where are the people? This is one of those weekends where so much is going on and life is taking everybody in so many directions that this is it. But it's okay because we're going to have a great dialogue on a very important topic. And we've never covered this in as much detail as we plan to cover it today. So I'm really excited about our conversation. But Armina, what we typically do is talk a little bit about what has been going on in the news, what we're seeing on our timeline and our news feed. And you mentioned one of them, Teacher Appreciation Week just passed. And we want to give a shout out, first of all, to all of our teachers, including you. Shout out to our teachers. We cannot, no, I think unless you've been a teacher, you have no idea the amount of sacrifice and toil and emotional, physical, and every other strain that can happen for teachers. And a lot of times they just do it for the love of their students, for the love of the subject matter. And it's weird. I mean, my first job out of college was teaching, and I enjoyed it so much. It was only for 2 years. It was at Pine Forge Academy. It was only for 2 years. The best 2 years of my life. But I always felt like they're teachers who love this stuff so much. Like they need to be in this space, not me. I mean, I enjoyed it, but the passion that teachers have for their craft, I'm like, I hats off. So
yeah,
shout out to all of our teachers out there. What's your favorite thing about teaching?
Maybe the mentoring part of it, right? So I did try middle school for like a hot month, and I was like, whoa, this is so not for me. And I remember driving away thinking, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. Then I got into this doctoral program, and in the program, my track is leadership and academia. And so part of it is that we have to at least teach a class so we can get the feel of it. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is a whole lot different in middle school. And so, in higher ed, you have students who are there mostly because they want to, right? Not because they have to. And so being able to pour into other upcoming social workers and just really paving the way for them. And so I truly enjoy that aspect of it.
I love it. Shout out to you. And for those watching, go ahead and shout out one of your favorite teachers from childhood or even currently in the chat. We love when we shout out our teachers and what they do. And shout out to all of our AEC teachers. We see you. We appreciate you. The other thing that we saw this week, the announcement of the new Pope. I know there was a lot of conversation regarding him being I think the first American.
Well, that's also being questioned too, but hey,
From Chicago. It's so many angles to this thing, depending on who's posting, of course, Adventists, we have our little
goodness, yes. Prayer meeting starting at 4:30 tomorrow, Zoom links have gone out already.
Right. It's like, here we go. This is what we've been waiting for, kind of thing. And it's like, wow, here we are. Here we are. I know we were talking. I didn't know how much attention I wanted to give that this week. But I'm sure that's something we'll be talking about in greater detail on the podcast in another episode. But
I was watching the news, and so I guess there's this thing with black or white smoke, meaning like when the decision is made.
Yeah.
And the newscaster was like, "Oh my goodness, there's white smoke! There's white smoke!" And I'm sitting there like, "Okay, do I really have the emotional
I know, right? Like, are you seeing this smoke? Like,
right, And then it was like, okay, so they have a new Pope, they're announcing, and I'm like, I need to know what this means in the long run, but just not right in this space.
Like, it's too much.
Yeah.
And I think social media has just created so many narratives regarding everything. You can get caught up in it and go down this tailspin of, just getting all lost in the sauce, as they say. So, but hey, that's a new Pope. And I mentioned, this weekend is also a big graduation weekend. I know even my alma mater, Oakwood, congratulations to graduate. They would have graduated last night, Saturday. And a lot of other graduations have taken place. So
Delaware State has their graduation. Well, the bachelor is happening right now, and then the master's is this afternoon.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Love it. Shout out to all the grads out there.
Yes. Great job. Congrats.
You did it. You did it. And we're going to have a special show at the end of the month to celebrate. We're going to talk about people, because you're in the doctorate program. We're going to talk about getting your doctorate, the process. Many of our upsetters are either completed, like Marlene is graduating this weekend. Woo! And we have some others who are finishing up. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the process, why you decided to go back, what the process was like, and the graduation. So stay tuned for that, guys. That'll be up later this month. We'll call it our upset graduation party or something like that. But yeah. So back to the fact that it's Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, Armina. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers who are watching.
Yes.
And to the gents, we hope you have celebrated the mothers in your life. This is our day. Do you think we ask for much as mothers, Marlene? I mean, Marlene, Armina. Do you think we ask?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like sometimes we just want to be appreciated.
Yeah, and I think it's we want to be seen, right? So if we wait for this one day to be seen, it doesn't hold the same weight as if we're seen all year long,
Right.
So yes, I hope the gents did something, for the mothers in their life, but I hope it's just a continuation of what you've been doing all year round.
Yeah, not just today, but little pieces throughout. But if you haven't been doing anything, you better do something today.
It's not too late.
It's not too late. All right, so let's go ahead and transition into our topic, which is, like I said, is one that we have not covered in depth on the podcast before, but one that I think is very important, and that has to do with those who maybe desire to be mothers but are not able to conceive naturally, use alternative methods for doing so, or become mothers through surrogacy or adoption. And we want to talk a little bit about that and how that relates in churches, how we relate to those people, how we don't talk about it that often. Some of the misconceptions that people have. And so I'm so glad. I mean, can you tell us again your research, the researches you're doing, the topic? I think that's so important.
Yeah, so my dissertation is sort of exploring the intersection of brain architect and infertility in Black women.
Okay. All
So
right.
essentially, that's a lot of words, but it just means that I'm studying how the brain waves respond to women who are going through infertility.
Deep. Now, let's just start baseline because, we hear infertility and people think they have an understanding of what it is. But what is the actual definition of infertility? What determines whether someone is fertile or not?
So with everything, there has to be timelines, right?
Okay.
And so the CDC has definitely laid that out, which is what doctors go by in order to even give you that as a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so infertility is medically defined as the inability to conceive after 12 months, 1 year of unprotected intercourse, or 6 months for women over 35.
Okay.
But
So,
beyond the medical definition, though, it's
mhm,
an emotional and a spiritual journey. It's the grief of hope deferred, it's the weight of unanswered prayers, and it's even the silence that often surrounds it, especially in our faith communities.
yeah, and that's why we don't want to be silent about it anymore, and why we're talking about it today. And I think it's also important to mention a lot of times when we think about infertility, a lot of the attention is placed on the mother or
Mhm.
the woman.
Mhm.
And there are two people involved in this process, and sometimes it may be something with the male versus the female. And sometimes I don't feel like that's talked about
Yeah.
as often. Do you find that to be the case?
No, no. And just in general, infertility has been or has like this shaming notion attached to it.
Right.
So, people don't really talk about it. And we then say it's a choice. Like, I am choosing to not have a child, because there are some people who do that. They
Yeah.
choose to not conceive or adopt or go through any process. So it's easy for those of us who fall under the shaming category to tack onto that, because then it frees us from being asked questions about, so when are you getting pregnant, And so, yes, it's not talked about often. And I don't know that I've heard it on the spin of the man, like
Right.
those sperm counts. Like, there's so
Right.
many different things, dieting, so many different things that contribute to that. But like with my story, they couldn't figure out why. So there were a bunch of tests that were done and everything cleared, but yet and still, after I started my attempt to conceive after 35. So by then I only had the 6 months. And once that 6 months window ended, it was the slapping of the diagnosis of infertility. And now here are your options, so.
So after 6 months, there's wow. Okay. So, and we're gonna talk more about your journey because I think it mirrors a lot of people's journey. And I will say to you, when you were going through your journey, did you feel like you had a community or people who understood what you were going through, or people that you could walk through the journey with?
No. And maybe part of it was because I didn't share it, right? And I didn't share it because the people around me were all having kids. And so for infertility, again, it's the idea of trying for X amount of time and not being able to conceive. And, there's some people who they get the diagnosis, but they keep trying and then they
Yeah.
do it. They succeed.
Yeah.
They go through the process and succeed, but no one asked, did you go through a process or not? We just think, oh, because they're pregnant, oh my gosh, yay, blessings. So I didn't know anyone that was going through that. And so it was very lonely, very depressing, very isolating. And I don't know if you remember, but it was sort of around the time when we had this wives group.
Yeah.
It was like everyone in the group kept getting pregnant. And I was like, I'm quitting this group because I am celebrating everyone. No, don't even be, right?
No, that's horrible. Yeah.
No, but that's kind of the part of the journey for us
Right.
is that
Yeah.
you celebrate your friends and you watch people around you conceive, and then you start to think about like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I conceive?
Right.
Especially, if they said, "Oh, girl, your tubes are blocked," I get it,
Right.
okay?
At least you have an explanation. Right.
Right. But there was like none. And so then you start thinking, well, is this spiritual? Like what is this something God's trying to tell? Like, you go
Right.
through all of these check boxes to find the reason for why. So
Yeah. And just
no, I didn't think I did. I mean, I think if I would have reached out to the ladies like yourself in that group, people would have rallied around me. But I just felt like they wouldn't understand the pain,
right.
right?
Right.
So
No, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, just to give some context to people, Amina and I are friends. Like we've known each other. We attended church together for several years, and during this time when she was experiencing this, as she said, there were a group of us who were newly married, and we came together with the attempt of just building each other up as wives. And I think when we first started, I don't think anyone was pregnant. Maybe Dorian, or I think she was the first. But you're right. Like there started to suddenly be this like first this person, and I do remember you sharing with us maybe that you were trying or something. I don't. I'm trying to remember, but from like my perspective as someone, I will say this: I always had that fear, even before I got married, that I would want to have a child and not be able to conceive. I don't know. I don't know where that fear came from, but it was a real fear. It was something. Let's put it this way: it was something I never took for granted that would just happen.
yeah.
So, and I remember having that conversation with Andre, saying, because he wasn't that anxious to like start having kids right away. So I remember having that conversation with him, like, I don't want to like wait too long, because what if I can't? And then, it's even harder, and, have it. So just, so when we did get pregnant, I remember being happy about it and wanting to share it with the group, but recognizing that there were multiple people maybe in the group who were trying but weren't successful. So there was even this tension of sharing it but not wanting to offend or be insensitive to where other people were in the process, but also this desire to maybe give hope, like, okay, I didn't know for sure that this was going to happen, so it happened for me, maybe it can happen for you. And I always felt like I didn't really know how to show up for you, because I didn't, like you said, I didn't understand, but I wanted you to feel comfortable sharing whatever you felt comfortable with, and knowing that we would support you. But I just think, just to give other people perspective, maybe your friends who are going through different things, what they're thinking, and being able to hear what they're thinking, and how do we come to a place where we can support each other and provide some type of community during that time. But
I mean, and I know I said like no, there were no supporters, but I don't think it was the supporters, because I have a lot of supporters in my life, right?
right.
I have very close. I have like pockets of different friendships and friend groups, and I did like test it out by sharing in these little groups, and depending on how the message was perceived or received, I then felt like I could either continue or just kind of go back.
That makes sense.
This is like almost 20 something years ago, right? Where this was not a topic. I mean, like 20 something years, we're just talking about this now. 20 something years ago, we weren't. And to your point, people wanted to share their good news, but wanted to be sensitive to the women in the room who possibly may be experiencing this, only because they haven't seen them talk about being pregnant or being pregnant. Not because we asked a question like, and I don't even know, how do you ask that question, right?
Yeah.
Just create a space that the person feels safe enough to share that,
Right.
So,
Yeah, because we're living in a society more so now where everybody doesn't want to have children. So
right.
you can't just assume because someone's married. And I used to get so annoyed, and I think every newly married person gets annoyed by, oh, now you're married, when are you gonna have kids? Like, let's just stop that. Like, can we retire that, doing that
Right.
to people who are newly married? But Because even just in a church context, be fruitful and multiply. Like, it's like, now that you're married, this is the next step.
Yes.
And there's that pressure, especially in our church settings, of you get married, you have a baby. So not only do you have your own personal desires, but then there's the pressure that comes from a church environment where this is what we're supposed to do. This is what the Bible has commanded us to do. And what does that do to someone who wants to, but feels like they're unable to do or fulfill what the Bible says that they should be doing? What does that do?
I mean, it's devastating, to say the least, because one of the things we don't do is we don't prepare people for marriage. Forget, like, I'm literally eating the wedding cake and you're asking me when am I
exactly, right?
Can I chew the cake a little bit? Can I digest it? Right. And so the next step in marriage is not having a kid, but I remember being an Adventist all my life and growing up in the church, and would see people married one week and it seemed like the next week they're pregnant, right? So that felt like what you do when you get married is that you conceive. So for me, I created that as my narrative that, okay, when I get married, I can't wait to get pregnant. But let me just say this, and I am a part of a trend that upsets the norm. So I was having premarital sex and I would be like, thank God I didn't get pregnant. Right? So then it was like, it was all good then. And then when I got pregnant, it was like, okay, no, God, wait, let's retalk this, because I want to get pregnant. Like, now is the right time. Then wasn't. And so there's this sort of personalization, or like God is teaching me a lesson, or maybe this is I'm being punished for sin. And we hear about that scripture in Genesis 1:28 about being fruitful and multiplying, and we also use it like out of context.
Yes,
right?
we do.
And then we as Christians, we are so good for giving theological diagnoses instead of the medical ones. So then infertility also becomes that same thing. And Tasha, when there's a misinterpretation, it kind of suggests like a divine disapproval, right? When in fact, I could talk about Sarah, I could talk about Hannah, I could talk about Elizabeth in the Bible. And so we as Christians have to be careful in our language and even what we say and how we say it, because we hear this all the time. We don't know what people are struggling with.
Right.
I remember being at church one week and we were going, so the way the process worked for me, if I could sort of jump into that.
Absolutely.
I most people know I've been married twice. My first husband passed away. And during that marriage, we did actually conceive through IVF. And IVF is in vitro fertilization, where they extract your eggs, take out the sperm, inject the egg in the sperm, and then it sits in the incubator and it cooks for X amount of time. And then they take that and then implant it in a woman. Right. That is like the Armenia version of it.
No, that's a great summary, I think.
So from that, I conceived. But that was a time where we were moving to California. And there was a lot of stress going on with the move. Like, we were moving across country. We sold our house. We packed everything in the car, and we were heading across country. And literally a week before leaving, I miscarried. And so with the infertility, once they implant, they follow you for X amount of time. So I was going every week to get blood work to make sure my levels were going up and not going down. Sometimes they go down, but they come back up. Well, my levels went down and then kept going down and down until there was like 0, which meant that I was not pregnant. And that was so devastating, because for the first time I felt like, oh my gosh, I actually did this thing, right? Yeah. And we were successful in it. But then life happened because we had to move to California. So it wasn't even a time to grieve that piece, because I was grieving that, but also excited for what was coming. I was grieving leaving my church family and my work. And so all these things was happening at one time. Went to California, didn't think about fertility or infertility, just try to get adjusted to living in California. Well, that didn't work out too well. So we came back to the East Coast. And shortly after we came back to the East Coast, my previous husband passed. So then I was like, oh, great. Because I didn't realize until then that when the person you're married to passes, all of the dreams you and that person have dies too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my dream to be a mother still existed.
Right.
I didn't give up on that. And to me, being a mother meant that I physically carried a baby for 9 months and push that baby out, or that baby comes out, and that makes me a mother. That was it. I didn't think of any other ways. So then fast forward, I got married again, and I was like, we don't have time. Like, we got to get this thing going, because now I'm tapping 40, and I'm in 40s, and I'm like, I gotta, that statistics at 35. So what happens at 40? Is it less than that? It goes downhill.
Right.
And so we started talking to the specialist, and again, the diagnosis still existed. And so we did, they always suggest a lower level, which is IUI, which is like the can't think of what that means right now, but it's just the injecting versus the extraction, right? And so they inject the sperm inside of the female, or they insert it inside, and then hope for a miracle. So we did a couple of rounds of that. That didn't work. And then we quickly jumped to IVF, and then that didn't work. And I remember we used to go, the way the cycle fell for me was I would go on Wednesdays and Sabbaths. So I would go Wednesday for blood work. They would give me the results like within 2 to 3 hours. And on Sabbath, we would do the same thing. And many Sabbaths, I sat in church, even sang on the praise team, just getting the call that says, we're sorry, the IVF didn't work, And so I was at church one Sabbath, and I must have had on a flowy dress or something. And one of the sisters said to me, how far along are you? And everything in me just like crumbled. I was crashing internally.
Right.
And I just said, oh, no, sister, nothing. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. And then she became so apologetic, but there was no medium between asking and apologizing, right? It was like, did you not think this through before asking the question?
Right. Yeah. And that's something I think we can do better at, in terms of those questions that could be insensitive. I always say, when in doubt, do without asking in that regard. But regarding the IVF and all of the other procedures that you took, can you talk a little bit about expense? Because I don't think people realize how expensive these things. I'm not saying give us exact numbers, but like ranges, so people understand what goes into this, not just emotionally, but even financially, and the sacrifices families are making in their conception journey.
So my last round of IVF was about 8-9 years ago, and I can only imagine what the numbers are now. Infertility, at the time I was in PA, was not covered under our insurance. Okay. And so the testing, some of them they applied to the deductible, so I still had to pay out of pocket. I, thank God, worked for a company that had the offer of a flex spending account. And so I would get the maximum of $5,000 on this flex spending, and I would wipe through it quickly, because every IVF is like, at the time, was at least $2,500, right? And that was the rounds of retrieving the eggs, and then again, depending on your age, it also depended on how many eggs were fruitful. So like, even though they could have retrieved 10 eggs, maybe only 2 of those were legit eggs where there was a potential that they could turn into a fetus, right? And so it was not cheap. It was very expensive. And so, but again, those were things that we pushed through. We had tapped into a 401k at one time and drew some money out of it. And then it started to feel like desperation, right? At what point, for me at least, was I going to accept the fact that this was just not my calling?
So you had like, what conversations were you having with God during this time? because you said you were trying to get to the point where you were accepting that maybe this is God's will and I need to let it go. So what
Man,
was that?
so a lot, I can't be too honest on here because I don't want to intimidate myself, but there were a lot of cussing out God. There were a lot of feeling as though I was questioning my worth, my faith, my belonging in the church. I was starting to become disengaged, and just kind of silent because I felt like God didn't care about me. Here I am caring about everyone else. And I thought I was living a good life according to scripture and according to the will of God. And the scripture that continued to sort of play in my head that I didn't like at the time was that God would give you the desires of your heart. Now, of course, I didn't go before or after that. I just stayed there, right? And I'm like, but this is a desire of my heart. So God, why aren't you giving it to me? Like why can't, there's no reason why I can't conceive. I mean, I did, but it didn't last long. And so like, what is wrong with me? What is it about me that you don't think I could be a good mother? Am I going to mess up someone's life? And so I was talking to one of our elders, Elder James, who I absolutely love dearly. And I went to her, and one Sabbath after I got like the umpteenth, sorry, you're not pregnant. And I just said to her, I need prayers because I don't feel like I can live through this by myself anymore. So she told me a story about a young lady who, same story, wasn't able to conceive. Doctor said all this, and then she finally conceived, had the baby, and legit, the baby comes home. Like a week later, the baby dies of crib death. Oh, and she said, so she's now asking God, like, what is happening? Like, we prayed on this, we have fasted on all the things church folks tell you should do more of, you're not doing, which actually is part of the shaming, by the way. Right. And so the lady, so she said God told her that this baby would have caused the mother more pain if it lived than if we took the baby away, if the baby died now. And when she told me that, it gave me like a glimpse of hope of like, maybe my track is not to actually deliver and give birth, but maybe I can still be a mother some way. And I didn't go looking for other means. I just kind of sat with that, but was still going through the rounds because, we paid for the IVFs up front. So you have to finish out the process or you lose your money, right? Oh, gotcha. And so after the last set of eggs didn't work, and this timeline is so blurry because it happened quickly. I called my mom and I was explaining to her, like, it didn't work again. Like, and we have no more money. We're done. And I'm done. My life is over. Kind of right, snotty nose cry, all of that. And then it felt like the next day she called me. I was like, do you want a baby? And I was like, what? She's like, do you want a baby? I was like, of course, I want a baby. She's like, well, there's this baby up for adoption in Africa. I was like, oh God, okay, we're not doing that. I was like, I'm not doing that. There's babies I could adopt here in the US. Clearly, I don't want to go this route. And so she was like, well, let me just send you the picture of the baby. And I was like, what is that going to do? But in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, please do, right? Yeah. So she sends the picture and I instantly fall in love with this baby. I know nothing about international adoptions or picking up a baby international, because she was like, all you have to do is just go to Africa and get the baby and bring the baby back. I was like,
that sounds a little too simple.
But then I'm like, I got to convince my husband on this. And so I remember he was sleeping and I intentionally woke him up while he was sleeping because I knew he would be kind of groggy and foggy. And I was like, hey, you want to adopt a baby? And he was like, what? I was like, we have an opportunity to adopt a brand new born baby. And he was like, yeah, no. And I was like, and he went back to sleep. And that was like the end of that conversation until like he woke up and I was like, listen, we could do this. And if anyone knows my husband, he does not make fast decisions on anything. He got to pray about it. He got to mull over it. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here like, come on. Right. Somebody else is going to get the baby. Like,
right.
Jump on this now. So eventually he said yes. And I think it took a couple of days. And the picture my mom sent was a picture of, spoiler alert, our daughter, Emmy. And
Mhm.
she was in a onesie and she was crying. And they snapped a picture of
Oh.
her like with this ugly cry face. Well, he had a similar picture of him in a onesie and this ugly cry face.
Really?
And he felt that that was God telling him that this. I was
Wow.
like, well, whatever works, bro. Whatever. Yeah,
Wow, look at that. I don't think I knew that part of the story in terms of the
yeah,
onesie, that connection from
yeah.
onesie. So that we're glad to hear the happy ending to this journey. And I wonder, when you think about like IVF and all the other measures that you went through, did you ever receive like negative feedback from people regarding going through unnatural methods of trying to conceive?
Yes, because there weren't a lot of research out there, and so hence why my dissertation is around the Black woman, because there's such a disproportionation when it comes to healthcare between Black and whites. Like that, that is a thing. That's not a secret. We know that.
Right.
And I felt like my Black and brown community of women didn't fully understand infertility and didn't understand the medical interventions that are made affordable for women who have this challenge. And so it was a lot of like, are you sure? And
Mm.
the way my brain works is if that is a question someone asks me, then you sort of go into a whole different bucket. You don't go into the bucket of support, because the are you sure is not like tell me more, I want to learn more.
Right.
It's more like I wouldn't do it if I was
Right. Like a little judgment. Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah,
feel that.
exactly.
And even this whole concept, because I've heard people say this about everything, trying to play God. Like if God wanted you to have it, he would have given it to you. So you trying to quote unquote manufacture your own
Yeah.
child. And I've heard people in the faith community say things like that. And I don't know how to reconcile that. Like,
Yes. Well, one of the things that was said to me that it doesn't sting as much for me to repeat it now as it did before. It still stings though, but not as much. It was God didn't intend for you to be a mother,
mm,
because if he did, you would have naturally conceived.
wow.
And this came from someone that was like very close to the process and very close to me. And I felt like I couldn't really cut the person off because of their
Right.
business, but in my mind, I was like, yeah, you will not hear any more about where we are in this journey.
Right. I mean, was that supposed to bring you comfort or peace? Is that, I
So
mean, like,
I think we have radical Christians, right? And
mm,
to me, a radical Christian says like, those kinds of statements,
yeah,
because while they look at the scriptures and her thing was the scripture says like, God's going to give you the desires of your heart, yes, but what is the desire of your heart?
mm,
Like maybe if he didn't give it to you and you've been praying for this a whole however many years, then accept the fact that you're not
right,
meant to be this. And in that conversation, she said to me, not everyone is meant to be a mother. And maybe that's your track. And if that is, then do you embrace it or do you keep trying to override God? And so my pushback with her was, well, how do you know that I'm even overriding God? And how do you even know that did God come down and tell you this himself, that this is a message to give to me? Because he surely didn't give me that message.
mm-hmm.
So it became very conflicting. And I will not lie, I walked away from that conversation thinking, well, is she right?
I mean,
I
you already having those thoughts in your own mind for so to hear someone else verbalize that.
right. And it's like, is she right? So, I think one of the things, Tasha, we do is we're quick to celebrate life,
Mm,
by evidence of a belly that grows and grows and grows. But we're slow to sit in the waiting with someone, and I
yeah.
think if we did more sitting in the waiting with people, we would organically authentically learn their story without even having to ask or assume things.
Okay. And I was going to ask that because, we talked earlier about the fact that, you kind of would choose where you would share what was going on, and that would help you determine like what more you would share. And we're always trying to encourage our audience, ourselves, to do better in certain areas that maybe we had a blind spot in before. So, from your perspective, what can individuals do or even churches do to be a little bit more supportive of women who may be experiencing this? I mean, obviously, you don't want to go up to women who are married and assume they want to have children if they're not having it. Is something wrong? Like, because that's not the right thing to say. You shouldn't do that. So, how do we create a space where women who are dealing with it, or families who are dealing with it, because it's not just the woman who deals with the effects of infertility. So I want to put that out there. But what is the appropriate thing to say? What are the appropriate things to do to kind of help?
I don't know that there is a one thing, right? I think for me, all of those phone calls that said, we're sorry, we don't show a pregnancy, or any of those conversation was a loss. And so, I counted each of those as losses, right? Because it was something that I almost had that I didn't have, or something that I had that I lost, that was taken or was removed or whatever. And so if we see that as a loss, just like if someone's loses a family member, there are certain things that, we shouldn't say. We say it anyway, but thinking of infertility as, sort of a loss, that's one. The second thing is, especially for our church culture, we have to shift the culture, right? I think we've done things the way we do them for so many years, and there's been a whole lot of talk about how that isn't fruitful, it's not really beneficial. And so we need to preach on infertility with compassion and content, right? We need to offer support groups, or even pastors need to have care training around this topic, because one of the things that members do first is come to their spiritual leader. And I get it, like, know your lane and stay in it, but you should have some frameworks around sort of all of these types of things. And so having, this pastoral care training could help. And then families, we have a family life department, right? Okay. Which is our traditional form of family. But what about the non-traditional families? They need to be celebrated too. And so I don't know if this is like Adventism wide, but I know in Allegheny East, we changed it to relationship ministries to sort of encompass, all of these different tradition and non-traditional families. Right. For Sabbath being Mother's Day, I wonder what that was like for women who are in the space I was in, or women who, who may not be able to afford an adoption, because while we talked about the cost of infertility, adoption is like, it's a lot of money. It's like thousands, we paid over $30,000 just to complete the process from beginning to end. We dipped into 401ks, we dipped into savings. And then it was like, well, when are y'all going to buy a house? Heck, how are we going to buy a house when we just, that whole down payment for the house just went to this kid,
This is a house. Yeah.
So I guess, changing our language, right? Because language matters. And I remember being in church on Sabbaths where they would ask all the mothers in the congregation to stand, and they were given a rose or a plant or something. They were celebrated. And it was like those of us who were suffering in silence were never celebrated. And you said, although I have a happy ending because we adopted, but it never changes, even to this very moment, that I still wanted and I still would like to conceive. Now, I can't run around a baby right now. I'm a little too old for that, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what I wanted. What changed is that my identity wasn't tied into that process, because for many years, I felt like because I wasn't a mother, like I didn't give birth, that I was not a woman. And again, things we don't talk about, and so the other thing too is the emphasis have in my viewpoint and in my story and journey has been, we celebrate those who actually look like they're about to give birth. We have baby showers for them. We have diaper blessings. We do all of these things. In the process of our adoption, not one of my major circle groups had a shower for me. Yeah. And when I finally asked the question, like, why didn't you think I deserved a shower? It was, oh, we didn't think you didn't deserve it. We just thought this one was doing it and they thought we were doing it. And then we just could never get the dates together. Right. But I have never seen in my journey family and friends who got pregnant that people didn't, as soon as we heard the person is pregnant, all right,
we're already planning. Right. Yeah.
So I don't know where the disconnect is, other than that we don't put the same magnitude, or adoption is not on the same level as giving birth. And we got to stop that, because the showers are not for the parents. It is literally for the baby that's coming. They need things, and I had a registry. I was ready. I was just waiting for somebody to call me and say, hey,
that I always said that's such a dropped ball. I mean, and I'm glad that you're mentioning that, because I don't think many would have gotten that if someone didn't verbalize that. I mean, because I think, like you're saying, we think so traditionally, sometimes we don't realize it. We're just accustomed to seeing a mother with a belly at a baby shower, and that's what baby showers are for. But no, any mother, like you said, it's for the child. If you're about to have a child, regardless of how you're getting the child, it still should be showered. Baby showered, and the mother should be showered. So I love that you're bringing that up, because I do think that's a blind spot that we can miss sometimes. And another thing that you mentioned that I kind of wanted to circle back, like past, talking about it from the pulpit or mentioning it. It's so funny. You hear people talking about, and I'm not trying to put levels of things that people are dealing with, but you hear people talking about cancer and other things that people are grappling with, even depression. Now we're hearing a little bit more about mental health, but you rarely hear infertility mentioned in those spaces, or special prayer for that. I'll tell you this, when I was in Ghana this past October, we were having breakfast before we were about to go to the church where we were ministering. And there was a lady that walked in. We didn't know who she was. We were like, okay. She just came over to our area, and she went over to one of the pastors who was with us. And she just was like, I'm so-and-so. And we still didn't know what was going on, but he was like, oh, and he like hugged her. And so finally they told us the story that she had seen him preaching, I guess, online. Mm-hmm. She was impressed by his ministry. So she reached out to him and said, Pastor, my husband and I have been trying to have a baby for however many years. I believe that you're the person that should pray for me and my husband to have this child. And he didn't know her, but he committed to praying. He prayed over her. I don't know if it was virtual or whatever. Within the year, she got pregnant and had more children after that. And so, of course, when she saw him, this was her first opportunity to thank him in person for that prayer and the dedication. And I was saying to myself, wow, I don't really see that happening that often. And now, granted, I don't know what's happening in closed doors or in pastor studies, but to hear that story of this pastor committed to praying for this family, and these are the results, and they're able to, and I'm like, wow, that's such a, I mean, and that's not to say this is going to happen for everybody, but just to know that there was a place where it wasn't just, okay, sister, I'll pray for you, and God's will be done. It was like he really dedicated this special prayer to her, and she thanked him. So she really equates him to being the answer to the prayer for her family. And I just felt like it would be great to hear a little bit more about that. And I don't know why we don't do it. And our pastors on the panel are not here today, but I'm curious to know why we don't.
Right. And even if we don't, so when I think of answered prayers, I think to a multitude of answered prayers and what that looks like, right? Okay. And I mean, while our story ended with adoption, I now understand why I didn't conceive,
You
because
did.
if I did, I would not have adopted this baby.
Mm.
Like I there would have been no need to, right? Because I would have had my family. And when I tell you, this young lady is an amazing aunt. Like when I see her, I'm like, yo, God, you did that.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
She's
Like,
special, really.
right. Like this is not what I envisioned for my life, but this is what you had for me, and when you're talking about pastors and preaching from the pulpit, there, I look at lens, like, we both wear glasses. So when you go to the doctor, they have you look through the thing. They say, see now.
Yeah. Is this
You're like,
bad?
yes,
Yeah.
right. So there are different lenses that we see through. And maybe the charge to the pastors is to really take a look at what is fruitfulness, right? And kind of take the beyond the biological piece of it out of it, and thinking about being fruitful isn't just about giving birth. It's about legacy. It's about mentorship. It's
Yeah.
about spiritual gifts. It's about building community.
Yeah.
And some of the most fruitful people in the scriptures never had children, right? So I became a mother through adoption, and Emmy is my answered prayer. My story didn't end at infertility.
Right.
It was reborn through hope and healing. And I think if that comes from the pulpit, then that message goes across the congregation, right?
Yeah.
So like maybe next year when pastors are prepping their sermon for Mother's Day, they really take a different approach to honoring the women that are sitting in the congregation, because while some people run to the pastor for everything, there's a lot of us that don't. And so that means the pastor doesn't know everyone's story in the congregation.
Yeah. And I think for sometimes there's a little bit of shame, because some pastors will say, well, I didn't even know. Like, because for some women, there's a lot of shame. Like you said earlier, sometimes you feel there's a sense of guilt. What's wrong with me? Is this something I did? And so almost coming to a spiritual leader to say that is almost like putting yourself out there to say, I'm flawed. And that's not the case. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's those who are dealing with infertility, there's a reframing that needs to take place so that you can feel more comfortable sharing, like there's nothing wrong with you. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
Yes,
that is a message that needs to be communicated more often, because anytime we can't do something that we feel like we should be able to do, we all automatically go to I'm defective. You know what I mean? And how do we reshape that so that
I mean, and I think the onus is not just on the church, right? The onus is in everyone involved, including the patient, including the person experiencing this. I mean, and that's why I chose this particular topic, because I just didn't feel that there's enough research on this and how it impacts the Black women, because Black women are always tend to be seen as the strong ones. We're always pushing through adversity and all things, still carrying that weight, still crashing out inside, but we still carry it. And infertility affects the brain architect because it causes depression and anxiety. The anxiety is the anticipation of what is that test result going to be. And the letdown of that, I'm sorry that you're not pregnant, that leads to this like sadness that goes untreated for some time, because again, you have a couple of rounds of this. And so if you're doing the rounds, each round, if it doesn't work out, can lead deeper into the sadness. And for me, I did not have a therapist at this facility. Once you told me you've run out of embryos, so there's no more. We checked with your insurance company. There's just nothing left in the pot. You've already told us financially you can't afford it anymore. The loan you took out has dried up. And it was like, so, we're really sorry, period.
Yeah.
Like there was no, we're really sorry, but the therapist next door is going to come in and just kind of go over. Like, I didn't have that. So my dissertation speaks to why we need that. Because in my private practice, I see a lot of women that come in who suffer from depression and anxiety and even trauma, not necessarily around like infertility or fertility, but just in this whole picture of being seen, heard, and valued. And some of us feel if we have not conceived and we have not given birth, society doesn't see us, they don't hear us, and they don't value us. And we as a church, we prove that hypotheses every time when it's in church.
Yeah, we perpetuate it. And it makes me think, because someone has asked this before, how much of wanting to be a mother is more of a societal pressure than a personal desire? And I don't I was trying to like, because obviously we're impacted by what's around us. I mean, we shape who we are and sometimes what we want based on
Listen, if we stop having kids, then the world stops growing, right?
Yeah.
So I think it starts out that way, where from a kid, I was given a Barbie doll.
Yeah. It's
like I wasn't given a
indoctrinated,
kid Barbie doll. I was given a whole grown-up Barbie doll, and then Kent. So clearly, the two of them are to get together, and then I'm playing house, and I'm the mother. So it starts very young in our children. I mean, not so much now, because the way how just social medias and just the internet has taken life on a whole different turn, that the emphasis is not so much these days on playing house and being a mother. It's really pouring into our kids, into what's your passion, what do you want, and boom, let's hit that from now until then. So I think it's a combination of both. For me, I desperately wanted to be a mother because I wanted to give a child a life I didn't have. And so that was my ultimate goal, was to be a mom and to pour into another human being and have the opportunity to redo and refix my childhood through this kid. And maybe that was the wrong way, right? Because I probably would have done more damage than good. And so, so in the in and now, in the here and now, God has really worked with me on that, sort of very behind closed doors, and have revealed so much about my own self through that whole process. And when we decided to go the adoption route, I started to blog on Facebook about it, and I would give updates on where we were in the process. And again, the feedback was like, "Oh, we're so happy for you," but that's where it stopped. I can remember one person who inboxed me and said, "Me too." I was like, "Oh my goodness, I would have never known," because I just thought they just didn't want to have kids, because there was nothing about them that say they even wanted kids, right? And so it gave me an opportunity to ask her, like, how has that impacted her marriage? Because while you and I didn't talk about that part of it, those trials and the denials, it impacts the couple.
I was going to ask, I was going to say, I know I feel like we have to touch on it a little bit. We have a couple minutes, because I feel like that is also a huge impact, not just on the mother, but the dynamic, because a lot of times maybe the spouses don't agree on how far to go, or this is enough, and one wants to stop, and one doesn't want to see the other go through all that disappointment and tears and all of that. So tell us a little bit, just in general, like what couples kind of go through during this journey.
Well, I think that you summed it up clearly, right? There are some days, in my journey, we for the most part, we were on the same track, because we both wanted to experience having a child together. When I met Vince, he had a 2-year-old, and so he already experienced fatherhood, but he understood how important it was for me, and so he was willing to do whatever it would take for us without us being homeless, right? I think we were like one paycheck away of being homeless at the time. And that's when, and it didn't work out. So we decided not to keep trying. The other piece of it too is I would get these mail of injections and medications. And between these different rounds, I had to inject hormones. And so I gained a whole lot of weight. And I hate needles. I'm like one of the one that I can't even stick myself with a needle. So let alone having to do this. And I said to him, if we're going to do this, like, you are going to have to give me these shots, because I can't do it. And he looked at me like, okay, yeah, no, I don't know that I want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so again, like there's so many details to this journey,
Yeah.
not just showing up in a doctor's office and they retrieving your eggs, but it is like you have to produce more eggs. And the older you get, the dosage is double, because the older you get, you're not producing as much
Right.
eggs, and they need you to produce enough eggs to be able to extract them.
Right.
So after each time, I'm left with all of these injectables and the needles and the this, and I'm just like, well, what are we doing with all of this, right?
Right.
And so you talk about grieving, and now I still have these things I have to get rid of, because these things symbolize, or at one
It's a
point,
reminder.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we didn't argue, we didn't fight over it. I feel like I was pushy because sex is not calculated. It shouldn't be, right?
Right.
Right.
I'm ovulating. Let's go.
We have to tonight.
Yeah,
And
we got this window.
Right. And he's like, okay, well, my body doesn't. I was like, dude, I don't care what you need to do. I don't care what I need to do.
To show up.
Right. And it just became like, it wasn't enjoyable anymore.
Yeah, it was like regimented, and
yes, and so that is part of the downsize of it. And honestly, even if we had money, I don't know that I could have endured emotionally another round of that.
Mm-hmm. The more I'm hearing us talk about this, more I'm thinking about this kind of falling under family ministries, like the things that couples may experience. I mean, we talk about couples and money. We talk about couples and even sex and intimacy. I have not seen anything about couples and family planning, or I don't know what we need to call it to make it palatable for people to feel comfortable. But I mean, families and infertility. I feel like it's important to at least create a space, whether you know someone or not, for people to be able to share, talk about that as a family and how it impacts the couple, and because I do think therapy is important. Don't get me wrong, but I do think church families can be supportive of, or help normalize it. And that's what I think it does when we have those types of topics and conversations. It normalizes that you're not the only one going through what you're going through. And maybe you can identify someone else who you can then support each other, because you both know that you share this journey.
But I think the challenge many Christians face is that church is not a safe space.
Yeah.
So like, in order for me to sit in a circle with people and have this conversation, I have to feel safe.
Right.
And safety really, it differs for different people. But for me, safety is like, are you going to keep my business right here? Or am I going to hear about it in a sermon? Or now people are looking at me weird because
that's why it's tough. It's sensitive.
So I think it's like,
I don't know.
How do you build that relationship with someone to be able to talk about it? Because we had said earlier in this conversation, it is easy for the couple to feel they're doing something wrong.
Right.
So that, we got to keep this a secret amongst us, because we don't want to share this and people look at us like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
And most couples feel that way because that's how the church responds to different things. And, so if we want to create this kind of conversation and to talk about it, is the church leadership board has to be open to inviting people like me to come in and share my story.
Right.
Because if you allow me on the platform to talk about it, the message you're sending to your congregation is like, we support you in this. We see you, we hear you.
Right.
We may not know you, but we want you to hear from someone who has experienced this.
Yeah.
And then that's when you have the people coming up. We see them, like, even in the Me Too movement, right? One person talks about it and then other people say, oh my gosh, my story too.
Right.
Before you know, you have a band of people who have now formed a support group because they found someone who is going through or is coming through what they're going through right now. So I think that's a great platform. But we have to embrace it, like other social norms that we're embracing, so.
Right. I think, great. I mean, I'm hoping this dialogue that we're having, it will open up some doors for people to feel more comfortable talking about this. It's funny. I even on YouTube, I follow some people who are sharing their, and it's called TTC, trying to conceive. I was like, oh, there's actually an acronym for it, trying to conceive journey. And I'm like, why am I watching these things? Like I've had my children. I'm done with childbearing and stuff, but I find myself drawn to them because I recognize it's not something that I can relate to, but it's something I didn't understand, and I want to understand it more so I can be sensitive to others. And I feel like I'm hoping that we all can do a little bit better about being sensitive to those around us and what they're experiencing, even if it differs from our own experience. Because sometimes people are like, can't relate, so they're just like completely hands off. And I just feel like if we're our brother's keeper, if we're in this world operating around people who are hurting or feeling unsupported, it's our job to step in those spaces. And that's what I'm hoping. So as we wrap up, because I know we got a lot, what are some of your takeaways from your journey, or what would you say to someone who, is right now walking through the journey that similar to yours? What would you say to them?
I would say to them to breathe through it, and that's a hard thing to say, Tasha, because, infertility is this invisible grief, right? It's the reoccurring cycle of hope and loss, right? Every month becomes a mourning period, literally. And it is so hard to get wrapped up in that. But, with the right support, like that support group you talked about that's on social media, there's so many different ones on there. I would say connect with people who are in the journey, coming out of the journey, and no matter how they come out, whether they conceive out of it or not, get connected with someone, because there is such power in being around people who have been there or is going through it. It makes it easier. The blow at the end of the month or at the end of the cycle makes it a lot easier to manage, because you can call that person and say, hey, this round didn't work. And you're going to get more empathy from them because they get it. They understand it. They've been through it. And the thing too is, we don't realize that 1 in 5 US women of this childbearing age that we're talking about struggle with infertility.
And that's a big percentage.
And then 1 in 6 people globally are affected, right? So it's more than just stigmatizing in communities of color. Motherhood is often closely tied to our identity, the respect, and the value. And what I would say to someone going through this is, there is so much value in who you are as a person, and your identity is not tied into one thing.
Yes.
It may feel as it is, but it isn't. And I thank God that He's given us different passions, because when one thing, let's say, fails us, we have something else. We just have to tap into it. We have to know what it is. We have to create space for it, and if all else fails, seek professional help. Talk to a therapist about it, because maybe there's something else happening for you that's making it harder to sort of arrive at the point of acceptance.
I like that. Very good. Very good. I think that's so important. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story, for being vulnerable in front of our live audience now. But I think it's an important topic. I'm glad we were able to cover it, and I hope that it helps someone. Obviously, our chat, our friends in the chat are usually very responsive, and so we invite you, share your stories or whatever you would like to share about this issue, so others can read it and be encouraged as well. All right. Well, Amina, we did it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to just be on here and share. Part of what I'm doing as a doctoral student is creating platforms to sit on and be at the table and talk about the shifting in the culture. And so I really appreciate the Upset podcast for having me on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll bring you back when the rest of the crew is here, but I'm glad that we got to have this dialogue.
I don't know, I was feeling some kind of way though, but it's all good.
You know, you say people don't want to talk about infertility. I guess we showed that today. No. But we definitely want to end by saying, once again, happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. And happy Mother's Day to those who desire to be a mother and recognize that, you know, as we said, being fruitful can show up in different ways. The nurturing that you provide others, you know, makes you no less a mother than anyone else. And so we celebrate you as well. All right, guys, have a great week. We'll see you next time. Same time, same place. Take care, everyone.